I hope you all are doing great. I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar session on design thinking in HR. On behalf of Agile People Ops, me, Mariana Di Rosario, your host, would like to thank you all for taking out your precious time and joining us today. So today's session aims to help us discover why HR projects can often be unsuccessful and how to remedy this, understand how to view employee experience as a product, and learn how to utilize design thinking in HR to solve challenges with your business. I would now like to introduce our United Kingdom country ambassador, Ms. Roxanne Allen. Agile HR and business agility have been a massive part of her professional life over the last few years. She has worked in Agile organizations, completed a qualification, and rolled out Agile HR in her current team. She is currently the talent development manager of a games publisher. Next, I would like to introduce our esteemed speaker for today's session, Mr. Jeet Mukherjee. He is a visionary work-tech product builder and co-founder of Kinfolk, a platform that reshapes people ops as a product with an aim to transform HR, people teams into strategic business partners, not cost centers. Jeet was also head of product at Hubble and lead product manager for the AI team at Beamery. Welcome, and over to you, Roxanne.
Thank you so much, Mariana, and welcome to everyone who's been able to join us and to those who may be watching the recording. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to introduce Jeet. He's a fountain of knowledge in the product and design thinking space. And I don't think he'll mind me sharing, but when we connected on LinkedIn, one of the first things he said when I said that there was a UK Agile People Ops community was, how can I help? So I had to get him on and do a session. So yeah, it is an absolute pleasure to introduce Jeet to you, the CEO of Kinfolk.
Thank you so much, Roxy and Mariana. Thanks guys for having me on board. I'm trying to currently figure out screen share, so give me 1 second while I figure that out. Let me see. Okay, you should be seeing my face again. Yeah. Great, thank you. So yeah, as the guy said, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Kinfolk, and essentially we help lean people teams deliver great hybrid employee experiences from one hub. And we do that through interactive automated playbooks to scale best practices and processes for the moments that matter, all the way from candidate engagement to onboarding, promotions, and to offboarding. And that basically allows people to iterate in real time on those processes and improve and gather data as they go. So it's kind of tying in my passion for product management from previous roles and my passion for HR and people experiences. So yeah, very, very happy to share more information with you guys. I can't see the questions on the left-hand side. So if any questions do come up along the way, then Roxy, it'd be great if you could have a look, and then we can perhaps cover it near the end as well. Thanks so much. Yeah. All right, cool. So something to start with, I guess, is this diagram. I really like watching Don McMillan. He's a engineer, I think, turned comedian. And he looks at the Venn diagram of career choices. And I wonder if you can guess where he put HR, and it got roaring laughs in the session. So I would think you're probably thinking maybe problem solving and people skills. That is where I would put it. But in reality, where people think of us mostly is on the bottom left, when we are kind of seen as the fun police in a lot of places, which is the traditional view that a lot of people share. And when you combine that with the fact that, as Mariana was saying earlier on, that most projects in HR are seen as unsuccessful, either because they are over budget, or they're over time, or it just doesn't match people's expectations. And when we look at the three main reasons why they fail, is because people weren't ready for the functionality within the business. There was poor change management, and the workflow and the business needs didn't quite match up. And when you combine those two things, you can kind of start to see that we probably need a new way of working, particularly in a hybrid world now. Traditional models of HR just simply aren't going to work and are failing to help us progress in the 90,000 hours that we spend at work in our lifetime. So we need a new model. And there's a rising trend around treating people experience as a product, which means that people operations, or in fact anybody from the people team, can now start behaving as product managers, as well as salespeople and marketers and customer support and customer success, because we're essentially providing a product and a service to our employees so that they continue to choose to work with us. And what do we kind of mean by this? Well, If we look at, let's say, the product experience, it ties quite similarly to the people experience. So you'll see on the left-hand side that we might start with marketing, then move into acquisition and activation. You onboard the users and you turn them into power users. And then you look at things like retention, revenue, referrals, and eventually they'll probably end up churning after a certain amount of time. But then you hope that they leave with a good experience and they turn into advocates, and then maybe they'll even return back to you. Similarly, if we then overlay the people experience, you can probably start to see a lot of parallels here. We start with employer branding, then go into recruitment, hiring, onboarding and ramp up. And then we then go through similar cycles of retaining them, making sure that we are contributing to revenue as a business and they're referring people. They might then exit and then we again hope that they turn into advocates for us because they've had a good experience and then maybe even boomerang back to us. So what this means is that in order to work in this kind of new world and this new way of thinking, we need to think like a product manager. And what that means is essentially taking our business from making slow, costly, and risky decisions to a new way of thinking where we can drive higher and faster ROI in a much shorter amount of time, essentially, with less risk. And what that means is that we want to move from something that is more solution and output oriented. So for example, we need an ATS, let's get this one, to something that is a bit more problem and outcome focused. So we need to reduce our time to hire, which may be the reason for getting the ATS in the first place. Moving from top down and assumptive. So something like we're launching a new ATS to help you and just rolling it out and hoping people use it, to being more collaborative and user-led. So actually asking the hiring manager what's actually blocking them from reducing that time to hire. And then optimizing for quick delivery and moving from there to optimizing for quick learning. So rather than saying, hey, no one's using it, let's get a different ATS, let's do it all over again, to say, well, we've made the small change. How has this change improved the time to hire? And what do we need to iterate on that to improve it even further? And the answer might be that, yes, we do need an ATS, but it will then help us to understand what kind of ATS by when and what functionality we exactly need to drive the outcomes that we're looking to achieve. And the way to do that, of course, is the crux of this chat, which is design thinking, which is the process that we'll talk through. And this is a version of the design thinking. There's various versions that you'll find online, but this is the one that I've gone for, and I'll talk through why in a second. But essentially, the first thing that we want to do, even before empathizing with our users or our employees or any of that stuff, is to define our desired outcomes, which is to align ourselves with company goals and really understand how we are going to be contributing to the company goals. Because if we are doing work that it isn't contributing to those goals, then it's probably worth the question of why are we spending our time there. Once that piece is done, then it's about understanding the current state. And that's where the empathy pieces come around design principles. Then identifying and prioritizing the problems that are blocking us from achieving our goals. Then being able to ideate and run experiments on how we might be able to solve those problems. Once we've got validation from there and higher confidence, then to design and deliver some solutions on the back of that. And then to measure impact and improve and iterate. And this looks like a wonderfully linear process. It isn't. It's actually really messy. But we want it to be messy and we want it to be tight feedback loops. And at times it can be a little bit stressful, but I guarantee it's worth it if you stick with it and you go through it. It will get easier and easier as you go through it. Because you're going to get learnings all along the way. And from the previous slide that I shared earlier, the whole intent behind this is not necessarily to get to delivery as fast as possible, but to get to learnings as fast as possible. And at each step, you might be able to learn in order to inform the previous step to then improve the next step that comes along. So that's design thinking in a very short nutshell. And now we're going to go through a simplified and a very fast example of how that might work. There's going to be a lot of content here. So again, if there's any questions that you guys have, then please put it in the chat and we can definitely pick it up in the Q&A. I also haven't timed this chat, so I have no idea how long this is going to take. So we'll see how it goes. Roxy, keep me honest. If I'm going on too long on something, just nudge me and I'll move on. All right, I see a thumbs up. Excellent. Cool. So the structure that we'll be following, you'll see on the top is the steps that we're taking on those light purple arrows. And then we'll talk through what that step is. We'll talk through what the questions are that we want to answer at each of those steps. We'll talk through the methods in order to answer those questions and how to prove out that step. And then finally, we'll in that bright purple box, we'll talk through the example of how it impacts in real life. So first step, define desired outcomes. And the question we really want to answer here is how can we contribute to business goals? And some of the methods you guys are going to be familiar with is your QBRs, your OKRs, any process that you use to basically align your business goals with your team goals, with your individual goals. If that isn't in place, then I probably wouldn't recommend any of this process, because then you're just doing work for work's sake, and then we're in the old model of working. So the first thing is to really figure out why we're doing anything at all. So an example might be that the company says, okay, we want to 3x our revenue in 2 years' time by building new product offerings that increase our addressable market size. And in this new world, of course, we just don't want to throw money at it. It should not be growth at all costs. So we need to be cost conscious as well. So an objective for the people team might be that we want to build new product engineering and marketing teams by a certain timeline in a particular order, because roles will impact each other. Alrighty. So once we've defined our outcomes, we can then get into understanding the current state. So the current state is all around understanding our people. This is the empathy state. So who are the key users? What are their needs and aims? And what steps are they currently taking that might be not working as well that we want to solve for? And remember, the goal is to build out the teams over the next 2 years or so. So some of the methods that you might be using is starting with hunches. And that's actually okay to start with hunches, because invariably through our day-to-day jobs, we speak to people, we understand how things are working. They may not have percolated to the top of our brains, but it will be there. You will know some insights, and it shouldn't be disregarded. Like, there's a balance between having the lived experience and you also using the data on top. But you can definitely start with that and validate it with interviews, with employees, with surveys that you might be running, light ones, and then also using it data and reporting if you have that set up already. The next thing to do is definitely identify the champions in that process. So it might be your hiring managers, it might be your sources, it might be your talent acquisition team. And then to create light personas, you can find some of these online in terms of what that might look like. But this is just for you. It doesn't need to be like Sarah the sourcer and then build out a whole profile for what she likes to do in her free time. It is just to understand and help you get a sense of what are some of the challenges that she's facing and what she's looking to do. And you can use things like the jobs to be done framework, which again, you can find online. But it might be something like, as a hiring manager, when I'm about to go to an interview, I want to have a summary of notes for the phone screen so that I can basically weed out the unfit candidates as quickly as possible. And then also one level down, so I don't look like a complete idiot and so I don't look like I'm not prepared at all. And the last bit is really important, and that's about without having to trawl through the ATS. So that's the time-saving piece. And you'll see a couple of emojis that I've put at the end of that. One is a hole and one is a painting. And this is kind of the classic example of people don't buy drills because they want to make a hole on the wall. People buy drills so they can make a hole so that they can hang a picture. And you can even go even further to say, so that they can impress their friends when their mates come over, or so that they can feel a sense of calm when they're in their living room. And that's when we really get to the heart of what this person is trying to achieve and why they're trying to achieve that. And that's when we can start building the right solutions towards that, essentially. Because when we kind of open it up to, well, they want to feel calm, then maybe you don't even need to buy a picture. Maybe there's other ways of solving for that, is the theory of the way that it goes. And the other thing that you might use if you have time is something called the journey map. So we have customer journey maps, we have user journey maps, and that now, of course, the rising trend in employee journey maps as well. So that might be things like looking at actions and touch points and emotions. So again, you'll find this online. Here's just something that I found quickly last night. You can see on the top the steps that they're taking, the actions that they're taking along that steps, the touch points along that way. So for example, if it's a hiring process, you might then break down the hiring process, the actions that they take if they're a hiring manager or a recruiter, the touch points, so emails or Slack messages, the emotions that they're feeling along the way to help us understand where the real pain is, and then to highlight the pain points. And this is going to be a starting point. You're not going to have all the answers straight away, but that's okay as long as you start from somewhere, and then you can enrich it as you go through the process. And an example might be, well, through this discovery, what we found actually is that managers are pretty happy with the hiring process. Great. Our time to hire is actually lower than the industry average. Okay, nice. And we're actually getting really good Glassdoor reviews from candidates, even better. But when we dig a little bit deeper, what we find is that compared to other teams and the industry average, specifically the engineering team, for them, the engagement drops after month 1. We're hearing from managers that they're actually taking a long time to ramp up. And we're also seeing that our year 1 retention rate is much, much lower compared to other teams, and even worse in the first 6 months. And that is then impacting recruiters having to refill the same roles over and over again, which then is going to compound when we try and hit our goal of being able to build out these teams over the next 2 years so that they can then 3x the revenue. So now we're kind of getting to the heart of the problem, which is where the next step comes in, around identifying and prioritizing the problems. And here you might ask questions like, what issues are occurring at those steps and why? Where in the process is the main issue that we want to be able to solve that's going to give us the biggest impact? What's already been tried and why hasn't it worked? Like, we don't have to start from scratch. Maybe some things are already working that we can get inspiration from or evolve a little bit more. And then what's the cost of not fixing it? And this is a really good way of creating a business case to senior leadership to say, if we don't fix this, this is how much it is costing us. And it's going to continue to cost us this much unless we do something about it. But you have to help them understand the pain that everyone is going through and the impact that it's having. And similarly, for your own benefit, it's also worth looking at what is the cost of actually fixing it? Because there's always going to be an opportunity cost. If we choose to fix a particular problem that we think is important, we are then by definition and by default not choosing other problems that may be equally important. So it's worth balancing those things out. And some of the methods that you might use is, again, user interviews, but at a second level, and then using the 5 whys technique, which I think came from Toyota, to really understand if there was something wrong in the production line, where it fell down and what was the issue. And you can kind of start to drill down into really understanding what might be the root cause of why something isn't working. You can again revisit your journey map and start to flesh it out a bit more. You can start to refine those pain points and really dig into those emotions. You can also look at reach and frequency weighting, again, which you'll find online. With that, you can start to see how many people is this problem actually impacting? What are the levels that it's impacting? Maybe what even their salaries are and how much time it's taking away, to be able to quantify it a bit more. And also the frequency. So how many times is this problem occurring? Which kind of helps us to understand what's in that kind of top right quadrant to say it's happening to a lot of people a lot of the time, and it's costing us a lot, and therefore we should really work on this. And again, in this piece as well, it's really, really important to involve the champions in your research so that they can really understand the pain, they can help inform the pain and help you prioritize that as well. And then, of course, it's really, really important to communicate those pains, but not only communicate the pains, but also look at the next steps. Because if we just communicate the pains, we're just going to piss a lot of people off within the business. Whereas if we say that we have a plan for how we're going to solve for this, or even if it's we're going to come up with a plan to solve for this, that reassures people that they're working on this and that we're making some kind of progress towards it. And the example might be that through the process of identifying these problems, we find that, well, we say we move fast and we love ownership, but really what that means is that inherently there's not enough support, or there isn't enough room for feedback. We dig one layer lower and we find that actually managers aren't even aware of issues until a few weeks after someone's stuck. When we dig one level further, we see that one-on-ones aren't structured and often skipped, and managers are too busy or they forget. And then we say, well, we've got notifications set up to remind people about the fact that they should be doing these things, and yet those notifications are ignored. And then when we ask the managers even further, we realize that, well, they don't need reminders, but they actually need guidance in order to understand how to best have those conversations and how to best ramp people up. But unfortunately, there's no time for training, and the training that we already have, they find really boring. So managers aren't going through manager training, and because they're scared to understand how to actually interact with new hires, they just don't. And they're leaning on the value to say, well, we move fast and we love extreme ownership, so let's go with that. So now we're kind of starting to get to the root of the problem here. And now you might say, okay, well, let's try and ideate and let's test some things. And really what we're looking for here is running experiments. And this is about what do we believe might have an impact, and what's the cheapest way to test that? And also, how will we know if it's working or not? And this really is an opportunity for us to go broad in a short enough time frame, and not to limit ourselves in what might be feasible or not right now. It's more about just understanding what is our universe of possible options in order to solve this stuff. And we can get to prioritization in a second. So some of the things that you might be looking at is to be a bit more hypotheses-led. And this is also a good communication tool to the rest of the business to say, hey, we are going to be running some experiments. We're making progress towards it, but this is a low-risk way for us to understand if something is working or not. And again, you'll find this online, but a format might be for hypotheses that if we do a particular action, then we believe that Y will happen, which is a change in behavior. And we're going to measure that using a metric change. Now, initially, if reporting isn't set up, that can be qualitative metrics as well, over a specific period of time. And that time-bound thing is really important, because if that isn't there, then you can run these experiments forever and they go nowhere. So using this, you can start to communicate to the rest of the business. And then based on that, you can then brainstorm ideas, you can do desk research. There's absolutely no harm in looking at what competitors are doing. There's a lot more transparency in different businesses now. There's no harm in looking at what other departments are doing and taking ideas from there in the same way that we're taking ideas from product management to then be able to inform how you might be able to solve these problems as well. And there's a lot of no-code tools right now that you can start to use and run manual tests. And the main thing is to be able to observe this. As long as you can, there's a classic saying in startup where they say, do things that don't scale. And this is really that moment. Try small things. Not everything will work, but if we move quickly enough and we are attentive and we observe, we can then move even faster to understand what will deliver real value. And then again, we definitely need to share findings and then leverage our champions in order to share those findings so that people are brought along in that journey. If we do these experiments in silos and all people see are necessarily failures and don't have the context and the hypotheses of what we're trying to solve, then it becomes really, really difficult to then continue projects like this. All right. And some examples, well, you might have possible test ideas for helping managers out to say, well, we're going to schedule manager check-ins ourselves manually. We're going to book it in for them. We're going to create one-on-one templates in Notion or Confluence. We're going to create 30, 60, 90-day templates for them to use. We're going to put tips in the calendar invites that we send out. We're going to send tips in Slack on the day, and we're going to do this manually at first. Or we're going to scrap all of that, and the other idea might be we're going to start to involve a buddy or a mentor or the rest of the team, because actually all of this stuff in terms of ramping people up and getting them engaged and getting them to stay isn't only about the manager, but it's about everyone else involved in the team as well. And you might check for these tests with conversations prior to this, even before you launch that test or experiment, to understand what is the demand for something like that and how much usage you're going to get. And then obviously conversations afterwards. I specifically haven't used the word surveys because actually surveys, again, may not give you the kind of juicy insights that you need from even 6 or 7 conversations that you can have with people that are engaging in this part of the process. And then you might be able to use some data, so the number of one-on-ones that are actually confirmed and attended, number of templates that are found and used, and also getting the manager's perspective on ramp time. And it's okay to keep things qualitative initially, but we want to end up moving towards a more data-led and data-driven approach. Cool, so now we've got some ideas and we've got some test results. Now it's about designing and delivering those solutions. And we want to make sure that it's delightful. And I'll get to that in a second in terms of what that really means. And some of the questions that we want to answer is, what's the sequence of changes that will give us the biggest impact given the time that we have and the cost and the team size? And this is a bit of a loaded question because you can't have everything. So you're gonna have to choose. Either we can flex on the time or we can flex on the cost, which is getting increasingly difficult in the economy that we're in now. So therefore, then we can flex on the team. And if you have a lean team and there's other people from the business that you've involved, then great. If they're not so involved, then really what we can flex on is time. So we'll need to decide what's working best for us in order to give us the biggest impact in the series of steps that we need to take, rather than a big launch and then hope for the best. And then, of course, it goes without saying, what's our comms plan for those changes? And then what's our measurement and reporting plan as well? And some of the methods that you might use is the MVP idea, where the aim really is to validate learning as fast as possible. And by MVP, we don't really mean like, hey, if we take the cake example, for example, on the right-hand side, it's not about delivering the basic cake and then the icing and the candles. What you really want to do is deliver a little cupcake or a muffin, see how that's working, how delightful that is. And this is really important for the delight piece because otherwise people won't engage necessarily. So once you've got that, then you can start to add more functionality to bring out a bigger cake, and then even further to pick out the full fat solution that you want people to use. And that might be the ATS at the end. And really on the right-hand side, you see the layers of the MVP. So it should be feasible, i.e. we can actually do this. It should be valuable, i.e. people want it. It's usable, of course, and it's also delightful. And delightful doesn't mean we're going to throw a lot of confetti and emojis in there necessarily, but even if you're making someone's life smoother and simpler, that might be one way to look at it as well. Once you have some of those solutions, you might then look at things like prioritization. So one of the methods you might use is, again, the reach, impact, confidence, and then divided by effort. So this is relative. So how many people is this solution going to reach? What is the assumed impact we think it will have? What is our level of confidence on the reach and impact? And then what is the effort it's going to take us in order to deliver that kind of stuff? Or you might use something like must, should, could, or the Moscow prioritization method to say that in order for us to have this impact, to solve this challenge, some of the features that we need of this program These are the must-haves. We definitely need to do this stuff. We're going to prioritize these first versus things that we should have versus things that are more nice to have. And again, you got to leverage your champions, and at this point, really use data to convert people, and then work in 2-week sprints and use release notes, which are basically your developments as you then start to roll out these solutions incrementally. So one example here might be that you might start by sharing basic bite-sized tips to managers manually in Slack and in meeting invites. You might then get feedback from there and create an async manager group to share ideas and write up those tips together. You might then find a tool to schedule these in Slack and get feedback on how that's working. And then you can wrap that feedback up and turn it into training, and then have managers lead it because you've already created champions by that point, and then reward people for doing it. And then once you've got that training and you've learned how that training's going, you can then update that bite-sized just-in-time tips with the training materials and then deliver that through Slack as well. So you've started with something that's pretty basic and pretty manual to something that is refined, which is informed, where managers are brought in, and it's being delivered via Slack automatically. And the final step is, of course, measure. So how the solution is being used, that's really a leading indicator. How are outcomes impacted, that's really a lagging indicator. What should we remove or upgrade to increase our usage or our impact? And also, why should we do it now versus in 2 weeks' time or 4 weeks' time or never, potentially? And some of the methods you might use here again are interviews, your usage stats, again, engagement surveys as a lagging indicator, and then you must communicate these via stories and dashboards. Everyone loves a dashboard, even if it's like a red, amber, green kind of thing on a Google Sheets. Even that helps people to understand how things are progressing. So an example here might be that you might see that managers are engaging with the Slack app, or maybe they're not. You might see that months 1 to 3 are showing higher engagement, but actually from 4 to 6, it's still pretty low. So we may need to increase our help post probation. You might see that teams with manager training are showing higher engagement over X number of months versus those that are not. And you might also see that reported ramp time, even though it might be qualitative, is 2 weeks faster. So those might be some of the ways that you might be able to validate things you're doing and then iterate on top of that. So this probably looks like quite a lot. So how and where do you start? And really, it's usually that people already have a hunch in terms of what needs to be fixed. So don't ignore that hunch. Or when someone says, do this thing, the steps that you can take is essentially play a game to reduce a situation of high risk to a situation of low risk. And the way to do that is you might then start to connect your hunch or the thing to business outcomes. This should be a fairly simple step if the business outcomes are clear enough. I mean, if it isn't, then stop. Once you've got that, then gather a little bit more data to understand the current state, and then find your champions. That's really, really important. Don't do this alone. Then identify the pain and quantify the cost of inaction and the opportunity cost of doing something. Ideate and be hypotheses-led, so be more experimentative. It is fine to say, hey, we might be wrong in this, but we'll know more and be able to deliver a better solution. Then you can start to run tests and pilots, and do use those words like tests and experiments and pilots to show people that there is a chance of failure, but that's okay, to increase confidence and to get to valuable solutions later on, and to actually save more money rather than having to implement a solution that may or may not work. And then as you go through the process, remember to share the learnings, whether it's good or bad or ugly, and then also share next steps. And while you're doing all this stuff, you're already actually doing the thing that someone has asked you to look at, but you're just doing it in more, well, in a less risky way and with more confidence and more buy-in across the business as well. And I guess the final thing to say is, well, a couple of things here is that start somewhere, start small. The process is an MVP in itself. You can improve the process of thinking more like a product manager as you go. We all do the same thing. We may not have the same resources in every single business. You might not get a lot of praise, and you might get some pushback early. This is a change, and the change needs to be managed, even the way that we think about it. But if we stick to it, we've seen time and time again that this kind of thing does work out. You're gonna have to be okay with being wrong, particularly when you start off with something like this. If you're continuously wrong, though, then it might be worth checking the process. But it's okay to be wrong a few times until the intuition kicks in and until the data starts to guide us in the right way. And then finally, communicate regularly, openly with learnings and plans. And the last thing to note is that when we are running through this process, we are not the heroes of this. We have to make employees the heroes. And this is a pretty classic thing where, you know, you have like a Harry Potter or a Luke Skywalker or any of those kind of movies where there's always a guide, and we are playing as guides to help the employees go through their journey. And this maps really, really well. So for example, you might start by connecting it to business goals and excite people with the data to call them to an adventure to fix a problem. Then you might say, okay, well, let's identify the true pain in the job. And this is still the known area. And then you take them to the unknown world to say, here are the hypotheses that we're going to test and we're going to challenge ourselves. Then you run tests and you get the data on the progress, and then you make them feel the aha moments for themselves rather than you having to them deliver the solution yourself. And then you can co-create solutions, which then brings them back into implementing the solutions in the real world. And once you've got that solution, then you've got to continue that loop to make sure that you build on it and it's not done. And they keep feeling that and feeling that sense of ownership and accountability as they go through the process. Cool. That is everything from me. So I'll probably stop sharing my screen now and hand over to Roxy. And if anybody has any questions.
I've not seen anything come up in the chat. Oh, I could be wrong. Oh, we have one there. Just 1 second. So it is from question regarding idea and test step of this process. For some companies, the time is treated as a currency too valuable to spend on progress rather than results. Sorry, as it's quite long, I'm having to scroll. Bear with me 1 second.
Gotcha. I can see it now.
Can you see it? Oh, excellent.
Yep,
So the question there is, what mitigation would you suggest when showing the value of the process is ignored in this way, meaning testing isn't feasible?
Yeah. So you're going to have to be a bit stealth on this one, Jack. And it means doing, and unfortunately, this is the no praise part and the extra work. There is going to be some work that you might have to do for those folks. But then while you're doing that, to move pretty quickly with a team of champions that I'm sure you'll be able to find within the business, then be able to work on something and deliver something really, really small. So I would challenge yourself to not come up with a full solution straight away, and to whittle it down, right down to be able to answer that question that you want to answer in order to validate whether you need to even move forward with this thing or not. So there's no magic bullet for this. It's really about making sure that you have enough confidence in order to deliver the answers to them while keeping them happy on the side as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that, G. I'll just see if there are any more questions coming through. I can't quite see anything, but I did have, well, it was more of an observation that you made, and it may be because you have quite an entrepreneurial brain. But I noticed when you were talking about the drill analogy there, and it reminded me of a book that I've read recently. I think it was Disrupt You, where it was talking about selling what you can do with the solution and not the solution itself. And I just wondered if you had any further thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, you see a lot these days, especially, is that people build landing pages and presentations before they even build a solution. And then they validate whether the solution is going to be worth building and to validate their assumptions of what the solution is going to look like by getting a bunch of people to sign up to a waitlist and then asking them, those are basically your early champions, to then invariably pivot into what they initially thought, because our assumptions are usually always, to start with, not perfect. So you could even do something like that internally. And I think some folks are already doing things like that, where it might be a simple page, or they might put feelers out, or they might do fake door tests where they add certain things to certain processes to say how much clicks that particular thing is getting, and then be able to validate that way. And it can be little things where you can start to get that data to build your own confidence in order to then invest more time and invest more people's time into then building the full solution.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, G.
And yeah, Karen, the cake MVP, love that too. I've seen that skateboard, scooter, bike, and motorbike car one as well. I recently saw yesterday that that is apparently a little wrong, which I didn't realize before, because you're essentially delivering different solutions. So rather than a skateboard, scooter, bike, and motorbike, it might be a less good car to a really, really good car. So yes, an MVP might actually take more work than we give it credit. But if we focus on answering exactly what that question that we want to answer is, then hopefully it shouldn't take too long. But yeah, that's why the cake analogy I found last night works far better and resonates a little bit better for me than the other one. Because at least then you're still delivering something that is delightful, rather than something that is not quite what people expect.
Are there any more questions or any commentary that anyone wants to share? There's nothing coming through at the minute. I don't know if we want to hand back to Mariana.
Sounds good. I think I've stopped sharing, right? So it's over to you guys.
Yeah, it's over to me. Okay, so looks like we don't have any further questions. So do we proceed?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much, Jeet. It was such a wonderful session. I truly enjoyed it, and I'm sure everybody enjoyed it as well. Thank you for this knowledge sharing session.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You will all receive a feedback form link in the chat box. Would request you all to share your feedback. We have an upcoming panel event scheduled on September 12th. During the session, speakers will discuss the general aspects of artificial intelligence, its positive impact, the potential negative aspects of AI, and how it can be overcome. Additionally, we'll have a moderator who will guide the discussion. So I invite you to all register for the event, and the link will be shared via email. There's also another exciting news. We invite you to join our upcoming global virtual conference, the People Ops Pulse 2023, scheduled from October 10th to 12th, 9 a.m. to noon New York time. The conference theme will explore how organizations can ACE, that is foster business agility, adopt coaching as a practice, and elevate the people experience. So I invite you all to pre-register for the conference, and I'll be sharing the link in the chat box. Hoping to meet you all during the conference. So what do we have next? We have an Agile Summer Festival scheduled on September 21st. And I would like to invite Roxanne to give an overview of the event.
Sure, thanks, Mariana. So we'll be celebrating all things agility in HR with legends in the game, Perry Timms and Kate Madison Greenwell, who will also provide a panel as well as doing individual sessions. So you'll get some information about that and how to register in the next couple of weeks.
And we also have a UK LinkedIn group. The link will be shared in the chat box as well. Yes, it has been shared. Thank you one and all for joining today's session. We appreciate your time and participation, and stay tuned for more. We have many more exciting events for you all to learn and grow with us. This recording will be uploaded on our YouTube channel, so stay tuned for the link. Thank you all once again. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.